Fivehead Creek, and fish drugging in the by Louis Beck 1. Fivehead Creek, and fish drugging in the by Louis Beck. The Project Gutenberg ebook of Fivehead Creek, and fish drugging in the Pacific, by Louis Beck. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. Title: Fivehead Creek, and Fish Drugging in the Pacific 1901. Author: Louis Beck. Release date: February 18, 2008. Ebook number 24642. Language: English. Character set encoding: ISO 8859-1. Start of this Project Gutenberg ebook. Fivehead Creek. Produced by David Widger. Fivehead Creek, and Fish Drugging in the Pacific. By Louis Beck. Fivehead Creek, and Fish Drugging in the by Louis Beck 2. T. Fisher Unwin, 1901. Fivehead Creek. I had ridden all day through an endless vista of ghostly grey gums and iron barks, when I came in sight of the long wavering line of vivid green foliage which showed me that I had reached my destination, a roughly built slab hut with a roof of corrugated iron. This place was to be my home for 6 months, and stood on the bank of Fivehead Creek, 25 miles from the rising city of Townsville in North Queensland. Riding up to the building, I got off my wearied, sweating horse, and, removing the saddle and my blanket and other impediments, led him to the creek to drink, and then hobbled and turned him loose to feed on the soft, lush grass and reeds growing along the margin of the water. Then I entered the empty house, made a brief examination of it, and wondered how my mate would like living in such an apparently comfortless abode. I must mention that I had come from Townsville to take charge of Fivehead Creek Cattle Run, which had suffered so severely from a terrible drought that it had been temporarily abandoned. We were to look after and repair the fencing, many miles length of which had been destroyed by fire or succumbed to white ants, to search for and collect the remnant of the cattle that had not perished in the drought, and see after the place. Generally, my mate was to follow me out in a few days with a dray load of stores. I lit a fire, boiled a billy of tea, and ate some cold beef and damper. Then, as the sun dipped below a range of low hills to the westward, I filled my pipe, and, walking down to the bank of the creek, surveyed my environs. What a God-forsaken looking country! I thought as I gazed around me, and, indeed, the prospect was anything but inviting. On both sides of the creek the soil showed evidences of the severity of the past drought. Great gaping fissures, on cracks we called them, traversed and zigzagged the hot, parching ground, on which not a blade of grass was to be seen. Here and there, amid the grey-barked ghostly gums, were oases of green thickets of stunted sandalwood whose evergreen leaves defied alike the torrid summer heat and the black frosts of winter months, but underneath them lay the shriveled carcasses and whitening bones of hundreds of cattle which had perished of starvation, too weak even to totter down to die, bogged in the banks of the creek. As I sat and smoked, a strong feeling of depression took possession of me. I already began to hate the place, and regretted I could not withdraw from my engagement. Yet in less than a week I began to like it, and when I left it I did so with some regret, for I had made friends with sweet Mother Nature, whose loving kindness is with us always in wild places, though we may not know it at first, and take no heed of her many calls and silent beckonings to us to come and love, and rest and dream, and be content upon her tender, mighty bosom. My horse, cropping eagerly at the soft grass and salty pigweed, suddenly raised his head and pricked up his ears. He had heard something and was listening, and looking across to the opposite bank I saw a sight that lifted me out of my sudden fit of depression and then filled me with delight. 2 stately emus were walking along in single file, the male bird leading, holding his head erect, and marching like the drum major of a regiment of guards. On the margin of the bank they halted and looked at the horse, which now stood facing them. A minute's scrutiny satisfied both parties that there was nothing to fear from each other, and then the great birds walked down the bank to a broad dry patch of bright yellow sand, which stretched halfway across the bed of the creek. Here the male began to scratch, sending up a shower of coarse sand, and quickly swallowing such large pebbles as were revealed, whilst the female squatted beside him and watched his labors with an air of indifference. Her digestive apparatus was, I suppose, in good order, and she did not need 3 or 4 pounds weight of stones in her gizzard, but she did 5 head creek, and fish drugging in the by Lewis Beck 3 require a sand bath, for presently she too began to scrape and sway from side to side as she worked a deep hole beneath her body, just as a common hen scrapes and sways and ruffles her feathers in the dry dust of the farmyard. In less than 5 minutes the huge bird was encompassed in a cloud of flying sand, and working her long neck, great thick legs, and outspread toes exactly as an ordinary fowl. Then, having thoroughly covered herself with sand from beak to tail, she rose, shook herself violently, and stalked away up the bank again, where her companion soon followed her, and I lost sight of the pair as they strode through the thick green of the sheoak trees. As darkness fell I built up a larger fire and spread my blanket beside it to sleep under the open sky instead of in the deserted house, for the night was soft, warm, and windless. Overhead was a firmament of cloudless blue, with here and there a shining star beginning to show, but away to the southwest a dark line of cloud was rising and spreading, and I felt cheered at the sight, for it was a sign of rain. As I watched it steadily increasing, the first voices of the night began to call. A possum squealed from the branches of a blue gum in the creek, and was answered by another somewhere near, and then the long, long mournful wail of a curlew cried out from the sun-baked plain beyond. Oh, the unutterable sense of loneliness that at times the long-drawn, penetrating cry of the curlew, resounding through the silence of the night amid the solitude of vast Australian plains, causes the solitary bushman or traveller to feel. I well remember on one occasion, camping on the banks of the lower Batacan River, and having my broken slumbers, for I was ill with fever, disturbed by a brace of curlews, which were uttering their depressing cries within a few hundred yards of me, and how I at last became so wrought up and almost frenzied by the persistency of their doleful notes, that I followed them up with a Winchester rifle, mile after mile, wasting my cartridges and exhausting mind and body in the vain attempt to shoot them in the dark. There is to my knowledge nothing so mournful as the call of the curlew, unless it be the moaning cry of a penguin out upon the ocean, when a sea fog encompasses the ship that lies becalmed. There is something so intensely human about it, as if some lost soul were wailing for mercy and forgiveness. But on this night the cry of the curlew was pleasing to my ear, for as I lay and watched the rising bank of cloud, I heard others calling from the opposite bank of the creek, and then a parrot screamed shrilly, and I knew that rain was certain. I jumped up, carried my blanket, saddle, and gun into the house, and then went out to collect firewood. My horse, as he heard my footsteps, bounded up, hobbled as he was, from the bed of the creek, and neighed to me in the darkness. He too smelt the coming rain, and was speaking to me out of his gladness of heart. I called back to him, and then set to work and soon collected a number of dry logs, which I carried into the hut and threw down on the hard earthen floor made of pulverized ant heaps, just as the welcome thunder muttered away off in the distance. I brought a burning brand from the fire, threw it inside, and then called to my horse. Taking off his hobbles, I slipped the bridle over his head, and brought him in under shelter of the veranda, where he stood quietly, with a full stomach and contented mind, watching the coming storm. Half an hour later the iron roof of the house was singing a sweet, delightful tune to the heavy downpouring. Rain, which, till long past midnight, fell in generous volume, the dry, thirsty soil drinking it in with gladness as it closed up the gaping fissures, and gave hope and vigor and promise of life to the parched and perishing vegetation of the wide plains around. With supreme satisfaction I sat at the open door, and smoked and watched, with my fire blazing merrily away. Then, before it was too late, I stripped off, and went out and let the rain wash off the dust and dirt of a day's journey under a fierce, baking sun. How cool, delightful, and invigorating it felt! I dried myself with a spare shirt, and then lay down on my blanket beside the fire to listen contentedly to the clamor of the rain upon the roof. About 2 in the morning the downpour ceased, the sky cleared, and a fair half-moon of silvery brightness shone out above the tops of the white gum forest. 50 yards or so away, in front of the door, a shallow pool had formed in a depression of the hard, sun-baked soil, and as the soft light 5-head creek, and fish drugging in the by Lewis Beck 4 of the moon fell upon it, there came a whir of wings as a flock of night-roving, spur-winged plover lit upon its margin. I could have shot half a dozen of them from where I sat, but felt that I could not lift gun to shoulder and slaughter when there was no need, and their shrill cries, as they ran to and fro, afforded me an infinite pleasure. I took off my horse's bridle, put his hobbles on again, rubbed my cheek against his warm, moist nose, and left him. An hour before daylight he stepped quietly inside and stood near the fire. The mosquitoes were annoying him, and he had come in to get the benefit of what little smoke was arising from the burning logs. At dawn, as I lay half awake, I heard a sound that made me jump to my gun, the soft quacking of wild duck in the creek. Stealing cautiously down through the fringe of sheoaks, I came to a fine broad pool, in the center of which was a small sandbank, whereon stood a black duck with a brood of 7 half-fledged ducklings around her, dabbling merrily amongst the weed and copyright bris of the margin. Of course, no one who thinks, unless impelled by sheer hunger, would shoot either an incubating or just family duck, and I laid down my gun with an exclamation of disappointment. But I was soon to be rewarded, for a minute or two later 5 beautiful black and white Batacan ducks flashed down through the vista of sheoaks, and settled on the water less than 30 yards away from me. They lit so closely together that my first barrel killed 2, and my second dropped one of the others as they rose. I waded in and brought them ashore. The name Batacan had been given to these ducks became they are too common on the river of that name. Their wings are pure white and black. I wonder how many people know how to cook and eat wild duck as they should be cooked and eaten when they are plentiful, and when the man who shoots them is, in his way, a gourmet and is yet living away from civilization and restaurants. This is the way. Pluck the feathers off the breast and body, then cut the breast part out, sprinkle it with salt, impale it upon a stick if you have a stick or branch of any kind, and hold it over a fire of glowing wood coals. If you have no skewer, then lay the red, luscious-looking flesh upon the coals themselves, and listen to it singing and fizzing, as if it were impatiently crying out to you to take it up and eat it. When I returned, the sun rays were piercing through the gum trees and dissipating a thin mist which hung about the green, winding fringe of sheoaks bordering the creek. From the ground, which now felt soft, warm, and springy to my naked foot, there came that sweet earthy smell that arises when the land has lain for long months under a sky of brass, and all green things have struggled hard to live. As I drew near the hut I saw that the flock of spur-winged plover were still standing or running about the margin of the newly formed pool. They took not the slightest notice of my approach, and I was careful not to alarm them, knowing that as long as the water remained they would continue to haunt the vicinity of the pool, and, besides that, I already had 3 plump ducks, which would last me at least till the following morning. After breakfast I set out to make a detailed examination of the creek for a distance of 3 or 4 miles. Towards its source. I was glad to find some very extensive waterholes at intervals of a few hundred yards. Then would come a stretch of sand from bank to bank, for owing to the want of rain the water had fallen very low, though it was still flowing by percolation through the sand. Yet, in time of flood, the whole of the flat country was submerged, and some of the large gum trees growing on the banks held in their forks, 35 feet from the ground, great piles of dead wood and tangled debris that had been deposited there in a great flood of 2 years before. I was not long in making a very pleasing discovery. All the pools contained fish, some of which were of good size, for the water was so clear that I could see them swimming about, and I remembered now with satisfaction that among the stores coming on in the dray was a bundle of fishing tackle which I had bought in Townsville. Bird life all along the creek was plentiful, but this was to be expected, as the long drought had naturally driven game of all sort towards the water. I saw 2 or 3 small kangaroos, and everywhere along 5 Head Creek, and fish drugging in the by Lewis Beck 5. The margin were bandicoot holes, where the little pig-like creatures had been digging for roots. 2 miles from the hut I came across a well-constructed native fish weir, and nearby found the site of a camp. Evidently a party of blacks had been enjoying themselves quite recently, fishing and cattle killing, for under some scrub I found the head and foreleg of a young steer. As I walked my horse slowly over the sand under the fringing oaks, I made the unpleasant discovery that snakes were very plentiful, not only the harmless carpet snake, but the deadly brown and black-necked tiger variety, though against this were a corresponding number of iguanas, both of the tree-climbing and water-haunting species. The latter, to which I shall again allude, is a particularly shuddersome reptile. I had never before seen these repulsive creatures, and, indeed, had never heard of them. I returned to the hut at noon, and to my surprise found a party of 30 or more blacks camped under some lachart trees. They seemed a fairly healthy lot of savages, and were not alarmed when they saw I was carrying a gun. I rode quietly up to them, and shook hands with 2 or 3 of the bucks, who spoke a little English. They were, they told me, from the Ravenswood district, which they had left some weeks ago, and were now travelling towards the Bidecon, hunting as they went. Some of them came to the hut with me, and I saw at once that they had not taken anything of mine, though among other articles I had left on a wooden seat outside were several plugs of tobacco. I gave them a plug to divide, and then asked the most voluble of them how many cattle they had speared. "Bail black fellow spear him cattle," he answered. What about that young fellow bullock you been eat longa creek? I inquired. Lit. We blacks did not spear any cattle. They assured me that they had not speared the animal, which they had found lying at the bottom of a deep gully with a broken leg. Then, knowing it could not live, they had killed and eaten it. I was pleased to hear this, and have no doubt the poor creatures told the truth. They remained with myself and mate for a month, and proved of great assistance to us in fencing and other work, and I learnt much valuable bushcraft from these wandering savages, especially of their methods of hunting and fishing. I shall now give the reader an account of some of the happy days my mate and myself spent in this lonely spot. 2. A few days later my mate arrived with the dray, which we at once unloaded, and then turned the horses out to feed and have a spell before working them again. Every night since I had arrived a thunderstorm had occurred, much to my delight, and already the once cracked and baking flats were beginning to put on a carpet of grass. And indeed, in 3 weeks it was 18 inches high, and made a glorious sight, the few remaining cattle eating it so hungrily that when night fell the creatures were scarcely able to move, so distended were their stomachs. Having started our aboriginal friends to cut down iron bark saplings to repair the fencing, we first of all paid a visit to our nearest neighbour, a settler named Dick Bullen, who lived 10 miles away. He received us most hospitably, like all good bushmen, and offered to assist us in looking for lost cattle. He was a splendid type of the native-born Australian bushman, over 6 feet 2 in height, and simple and unaffected in his manner. I shall remember this man for one thing. He had 2 of the finest teams of working bullocks I have ever seen, and handled them in a way that commanded our admiration. Never once did he use his whip for any other purpose than to crack it occasionally, and it did one good to hear his cheery call to the 14 laboring beasts as they toiled up the steep side of a creek or gully with a heavy load of timber, straining every nerve in their great bodies, while the sweat poured off their coats in streams. He was like one of his own bullocks. 5 Head Creek, and fish drugging in the by Louis Beck 6. Patient, cheerful, and strong, and an exclamation of anger seldom passed his lips, an oath never. He took a great pride in the appearance of his teams, and especially of the fact that no one of them showed the marks of a whip. We spent a pleasant hour with this man, and returned home by a different route, in the hope of getting a plain turkey, an altogether different bird from the scrub turkey. Hansen, my mate, was an excellent shot, especially with a rifle, and indeed when shooting turkeys preferred to use a .44 Winchester rifle. We managed to get one bird a cock, but so old and poor that we gave it to the black contingent to eat. Nothing in the shape of food came amiss to these people, and their appetites were astounding. One day Hansen and I were following down a creek which junctioned with the Reed River, when we saw smoke ascending from a dry gully. Riding up, we came across a very old and shriveled gin and a boy and girl of about 8 years of age. They were busily engaged in eating emu eggs, and out of 13 had already devoured 11, together with 400 or 500 of fresh water cockles. Such a meal would have satisfied half a dozen hungry white men. Their overloaded stomachs presented a disgusting appearance, and they were scarcely able to articulate. A week after our arrival, the blacks told us that there were indications that the rainy season would come on earlier than usual, and that game, except duck and spur-winged plover, would be very scarce, also that if the creek came down in flood, it would carry away most of the fish. This was bad news for such ardent sportsmen as Hansen and myself, for we were looking forward to plenty of fishing and shooting, not alone for its pleasures, but also because we were charged heavily for anything but the ordinary salt beef, tea, sugar and flour. Sardines and tinned salmon were luxuries we could not afford, but fresh fish and game were better, and, even when salted, were preferable to a continuous diet of beef. We had among our stores a 250 pounds bag of coarse salt. We had to kill our own meat and salt it down, and I proposed that we should at once set to work whilst the weather was fine and spend a week shooting and fishing such game as plain turkeys, the bustard, scrub turkeys, cockatoos, ducks, and we could put in brine, whilst the fish could be dry salted and then put in the sun to dry. Hansen quite approved the idea, and we at once set to work. I was to be fisherman, and he the gunner, for, curiously enough, my mate was the most helpless creatures with a fishing line or rod that I ever saw. In 5 minutes he would either have his line hopelessly tangled, his rod broken, or his hook caught in his hand, and yet he never lost his temper. Taking with me 2 sturdy black boys as porters, and also bringing my gun and ammunition in case of meeting duck, I set out on foot, Hansen riding off, accompanied by a black fellow, to a chain of shallow lagoons 5 miles away. Within a quarter of a mile from the house was a fine deep water hole formed by the creek being here confined between high banks. At one end, however, an exposed bar of small, coarse round pebbles ran almost across. And here I decided to begin, instead of from the bank, for not only were snakes difficult to see in the undergrowth, but plants of the dreaded stinging tree were also growing around and between the magnificent gums and the lage hearts. These latter trees, named after the ill-fated Dr. Leichhardt, are, I think, the most strikingly handsome of all large trees in the north of Queensland. They love to grow near or even in the water. And their broad, beautiful leaves give a welcome shade. But before I descended to the bank I had to remain for some minutes to gaze on the beauty of the scene. The water at one end of the pool was of the deepest blue, towards the pebbly bar it gradually shallowed, and for the next 8 or 10 feet from the margin was as clear as crystal. Close in under the banks the broad leaves of blue flowering water lilies covered the surface with a carpet of many shades of green and pink, hovering above the lily leaves were hundreds of small white butterflies, with here and there a black and yellow banded dragonfly, horse stingers the Australian youth call them. Not a sound broke the silence, except now and then the rippling splash of a fish rising to the surface, or the peculiar click made by a crayfish burrowing under a stone. 5 Head Creek, and fish drugging in the by Lewis Beck 7. I leant over the bank and looked down, and then gave a start of pleasure, for right beneath me were 3 fish, floating motionless on the surface, fish that, until then, I never knew lived in fresh water. They were in shape, color, and appearance exactly like the toothed gar so common on the sea coast, a long slender body with back of dark blue, sides of silvery white, and fins and tail of blue tipped with yellow. I was so excited that I was about to shoot them, but remembered that at so short a distance I should have only blown them to pieces, especially as they were directly beneath me. I motioned to the black boys to come and look. They did so, and I learnt that these fish, when the creek was low, were sometimes plentiful, and would take almost any floating bait, especially if it were alive. Eager to begin, I told the boys to collect some crayfish for bait, but they said that it would take too long, and small fish were better, and running to some small lily-covered pools about 2 feet in diameter, and very shallow, they jumped in and stirred up the sand and muddy sediment at the bottom. In a few minutes some scores of very pretty red and silvery-hued minnows were thrown out on the sand. I quickly baited my line, and threw it, with the sinker attached, into the center of the pool. Before it could sink the bait was taken by a fine bream of 2 pounds, which I landed safely, and tossed to the boys. It was the first freshwater bream I had caught in Queensland, and I felt elated. Finding that the pool was clear of snags, I bent on 3 extra hooks, baiting each one with the whole of a tiny fish. Again the baits were seized before they reached the bottom. I hauled in 2 more bream, and as they came struggling and splashing into the shallow water I saw they were being followed by literally hundreds of the same species, and also by fish much like an English grayling. The pool seemed to be alive. The presence of such large numbers in so circumscribed a space could, however, be easily accounted for by the absence of rain for so many months, the drying up of many minor pools and stretches, and the diminution of the water generally throughout the creek and its tributaries, driving the fish to congregate in the deeper and larger pools. By noon I had caught as many fish as the boys could carry. None, it is true, were very large, 2.5 pounds being the heaviest, but I was pleased to learn that there were places farther down the creek where the blacks frequently caught some very large catfish, when the water was muddy from heavy rain. These catfish, or, as some people call them, jewfish, are the heaviest and best of all the Queensland River fish I have ever tasted. Except those which, for want of their true name, I called grayling, and Hansen asserted were trout. Sending the black boys off with the fish, I cut a rod from a she-oak and quickly rigged a line. For a float I used a small piece of dead wood, and baited with the largest minnow I could find. Then, clambering up the bank, I found a suitable open place to stand at the butt of a Leichhardt, from where I had a good view. I could not, however, see any of the gars, one at least of which I was so anxious to get, but made a cast into the Center, and almost instantly one darted out from under the lily leaves and hooked himself beautifully, but in swinging him out my line fouled a thorny bush, and for a minute I was in despair. There was the shining beauty suspended over the water, and almost making a circle of his body in his struggle to escape. At last, however, I cleared my line, and swung my prize high up on the bank, determined to get a better rod, and return after dinner. I picked up gun and fish and followed the boys. By sunset I had a catch of fish that fairly astonished Hansen when he returned at dusk with but half a dozen black duck, 2 or 3 teal, and 2 turkeys. All that evening we were employed in cleaning and salting the fish and birds, except some for immediate use. We had many such days. Fish were to be had all throughout the course of the creek, and had we possessed a net like those the blacks sometimes used, we could have taken a hogsheadful in half an hour. Then, as the rainy season began, I ceased fishing and took to the gun, for now 3 or 4 kinds of duck made their appearance, and one moonlight night an immense number alighted in the creek just below the hut, and kept up an incessant gabble and quacking till sunrise. 5 Head Creek, and fish drugging in the by Louis Beck 8. In less than 10 days we had enough salted game and dried and smoked fish to last us 3 months, even had we eaten nothing else. Our black friends, with the exception of one lad who desired to remain, left us one morning at sunrise, and we saw them no more. I am afraid they were deeply hurt by our poisoning half a dozen of their mangy dogs, which were, with the rest of the pack, a continual source of annoyance to us by their expert thieving. One dull, rainy day, as we sat indoors mending our clothes and yarning and smoking, we heard the scream of parrots, and, going to the door, saw some 20 or 30 of them, large, fine, green and scarlet plumaged birds, hanging on to and crawling in and out among the branches of some low trees growing between the stockyard and the creek. These trees were a species of wattle, and were just opening out their yellow, sweet-smelling, downy flowers, which the beautiful birds were devouring eagerly. We did not disturb them, and they did not appear to be alarmed when we walked up to within a few yards of the trees, merely screaming defiance, and flying up to the higher branches, or to other trees nearby. These birds the local settlers called king parrots. They were larger than those of the same species in New South Wales, and later in the season we shot a few of them for soup. This particular flock visited us for many days in succession, forming a pretty picture as they hung on the branches, chattering loudly the while, and flashing their gaily colored plumage in the bright sunshine. Like the spur-winged plover, they were very inquisitive birds. If one of their number was shot, and fell wounded, the rest of the flock would fly round and round the poor creature, watching its movements and listening to its cries, not out of pity, but of sheer curiosity, and each could be shot in succession, or sometimes knocked down with a stick. I was told by a stockman on Fanning Downs station that on several occasions when he had wounded birds of this variety of the parrot tribe, their companions descended upon them with fury, tore out their feathers and bit and lacerated them savagely. Now and again a few wandering emus would cross the grey gum plains around us, and then, as they caught sight of our figures, shamble quickly off again. In former years they had been plentiful in the district, and provided good food for the aborigines when the latter organized their big hunting parties. But as the country was taken up as cattle runs, hundreds of the great birds were wantonly shot by white men for the mere pleasure of killing, and all the months we lived in the district we did not see more than 20. I have before spoken of the number of snakes that were everywhere to be seen in the vicinity of the water, particularly about pools with a reedy margin. Scarcely a week passed without our killing 3 or 4, and we were always careful in bathing to do so in very shallow water, where there was a clear sandy bottom. There were 3 kinds of water snakes, one of which was of a dull blue color, and these the blacks said were bad fellow, i.e., venomous. They seldom grew over 2.5 feet in length, and on a bright day one might see several of these reptiles swimming across from one bank to the other. Of the common brown snake, the kind we most dreaded, and the black-necked tiger snake, we killed numbers with our guns and with sticks. And one day, when crossing some red ironstone ridges on the Ravenswood Road, we dispatched 2 death adders which were lying asleep on the bare, hot road. They were of a dull reddish-brown, the same hue as the ground in the ironstone country, just as they are a yellowish-brown in a sandstone region. One great pest to us when fishing were the number of mud turtles, greedy little creatures which persistently swallowed our hooks, which could only be recovered by placing one's foot on their backs, drawing out their long snaky necks to the utmost tension, and cutting off their heads. The other pests were the hideous flabby water iguanas, I do not know their proper name, which, although they never interfered with our lines, sickened us even to look at them. They were always to be seen lying on a log or snag in the water. As you approached, they either crawled down like an octopus, or dropped, in a boneless, inert mass, without a splash. Their slimy, scaleless skins were a muddy yellow, and in general they resembled an eel with legs. Even the blacks looked on them with disgust, though they are particularly fond of the ordinary iguana. The time passed somewhat wearily to us when heavy rains and flooded country kept us indoors for days together. Then one night, after the weather had begun to get cooler and clearer, we heard, far, far overhead, the honk, honk of the wild geese, flying southwards to distant lagoons, and Hansen reminded me that in another 5-Head Creek, and fish drugging in the by Lewis Beck 9 week our term of service came to an end. What made you think of it? I asked. The cry of the wild geese going south. For we, too, longed for the south again. Fish drugging in the Pacific. In an American magazine of a few months ago, mention was made of the discovery of a method of capturing fish by impregnating the waters of slowly running rivers or small lakes with a chemical which would produce stupefaction, and cause the fish to rise helpless to the surface. The American discoverer no doubt thought he really had discovered, though I am sure many thousands of people in the civilized world have heard of, and some few hundreds very often seen, fish captured in a somewhat similar manner, the which is, I believe, practiced not only in India, Africa, and South America, but in the islands of the North and South Pacific, and I have no doubt but that it was known thousands of years ago, perhaps even when the world was young. Nearly all the Malayo-Polynesian people inhabiting the high, mountainous islands of the South Pacific and North Pacific Oceans can, and do, catch fish in the novel manner before mentioned, i.e., by producing stupefaction, though no chemicals are used, while even the Australian Aborigines, almost as low a type of savage as the Fuegians, use a still simpler method, which I will at once briefly describe as I saw it practiced by a mob of Myall, wild, blacks camped on the Kirk River, a tributary of the Great Batacan River in North Queensland. At a spot where the stream was about 100 feet wide, and the water very shallow, not over 6 inches in depth, a rude but efficient dam was expeditiously constructed by thrusting branches of sheoak and ti tree into the sandy bottom, and then making it partially waterproof by quickly filling the interstices with earthen sods, ti tree bark, reeds, leaves, and the other decopyrite found on the banks. In the center a small opening was left, so as to relieve the pressure when the water began to rise. Some few hundred yards further up were a chain of water holes, some of which were deep, and in all of which, as I knew by experience, were plenty of fish, bream, perch, and a species of grayling. As soon as the dam was complete, the whole mob, except some gins and children, who were stationed to watch the opening before mentioned, sprang into the water, carrying with them great quantities of a greasy grayish-blue kind of clay, which rapidly dissolved and charged the clear water with its impurities. Then, too, at the same time 30 or 40 of their number, over 100, began loosening and tearing away portions of the overhanging bank, and toppling them over into the stream. This they accomplished very dexterously by means of heavy, pointed sticks. The work was carried out with an astounding clamor, those natives in the water diving to the bottom and breaking up the fallen earth still further till each pool became of the color and something of the consistency of green pea soup. Hundreds of fish soon rose gasping to the surface, and these were at once seized and thrown out upon the banks, where a number of young pickaninnies darted upon them to save them being devoured by a swarm of mongrel dogs, which lent an added interest to the proceedings by their incessant yelping and snapping. As the slowly running current carried the suffocating and helpless fish downstream, the hideous noise increased, for the shallow stretch in front of the dam was soon covered with the bream, and the so-called grayling, perch, eels, and some very large catfish. The latter, which I have mentioned on a previous page, is one of the most peculiar-looking but undoubtedly the best flavoured of all the Queensland freshwater fishes. It is scaleless, tailless, blue-grey in colour, and has a long dorsal spike, like the saltwater leather jacket. A scratch from this spike is always dangerous, as it produces intense pain, and often causes blood poisoning. Altogether over 1,000 fish must have been taken, and I gazed at the destruction with a feeling of anger, for these pools had afforded my mining mates and myself excellent sport, and a very welcome change of diet from the eternal beef and damper. But, a few days later, after our black friends had wandered off to other pastures, I was delighted to find that there were still plenty of fish in the pools. Fivehead Creek, and fish drugging in the by Lewis Beck 10. Early in the 70s I was shipwrecked with the once notorious Captain Bully Hayes, on Kuzai Strong's Island, the eastern outlier of the Caroline Islands on the North Pacific, and lived there for 12 happy months, and here I saw for the first time the method of fish stupefaction employed by the interesting and kindly-natured people of this beautiful spot. I had previously seen, in eastern Polynesia, the natives drugging fish by using the pounded nuts of the futu tree, Barringtonia speciosa, and one day as I was walking with a native friend along the beach near the village in which I lived, I picked up a futu nut lying on the sand, and remarked that in the islands to the far south the people used it to drug fish. Kuzai laughed. Futu is good, but we of Kuzai do not use it. We have ope which is stronger and better. Come, I will show you some ope growing, and tomorrow you shall see how good it is. Turning off to our right, we passed through a grove of screw pines, and then came to the foot of the high mountain range traversing the island, where vine and creeper and dense jungle undergrowth struggled for light and sunshine under the dark shade of giant trees, whose thick leafy branches, 100 feet above, were rustling to the wind. Here, growing in the rich, red soil, was a cluster of ope, a thin-stemmed, dark green-leaved plant about 3 feet in height. Kuzai pulled one by the roots, and twisted it round his left hand, a thick, white and sticky juice exuded from the bark. It sickens the fish very quickly, he said, quicker than the futu nut. If much of it be bruised and thrown into the water, it kills the largest fish very soon, and even turtles will sicken. It is very strong. I asked him how the people of Kuzai first became acquainted with the properties of the plant. He shook his head. I do not know. God made it to grow here in Kuzai in the days that were dark, heathenism, and when we were a young people. A wise man from Germany was here 10 years ago, and he told us that the people of Panapa copyright, far to the west, use the ope even as we use it, but that in Panapa copyright the plant grows larger and is more juicy than it is here. Asterisk. The wise man from Germany, I ascertained a year or two afterwards, was the well-known J.S. Kubery, a gentleman who, although engaged in trading pursuits, yet enriched science by his writings on his discoveries. In Micronesia. Early on the following morning, when the tide was falling, and the jagged pinnacles of coral rock began to show on the barrier reef opposite the village, the entire population, about 60 all told, were awaiting Cusis and myself outside his house. The men carried small, unbarbed fish spears, the women and children baskets and bundles of ope. From the village to the reef was a distance of 2 miles, which we soon covered by smart paddling in a dozen or more canoes, for had we delayed we should, through the falling tide, have been obliged to leave our stranded crafts on the sand, halfway, and walk the remainder. I need not here attempt to describe the wondrous beauties of a South Sea coral reef at low tide. They have been fully and ably written about by many distinguished travelers, but the barrier reef of Strong's Island is so different in its formation from those of most other islands in the Pacific, that I must, as relative illustration to this account of the fishing by Ope, mention its peculiarity. Instead of the small clefts, chasms, and pools which so frequently occur on the barrier reefs of the Five-Head Creek, and fish drugging in the by Lewis Beck 11 mountainous islands of Polynesia and Melanesia, and which at low tide are untenanted except by the smallest varieties of rock fish, here were a series of deep, almost circular, miniature lakes, set in a solid wall of coral rock with an overlapping edge, which made the depth appear greater than it was, especially when one stood on the edge and looked down to the bottom, 4 to 6 fathoms below. In all of these deep pools were great numbers or fish of many varieties, size, and color, some swimming to and fro or resting upon the sandy bottom, others moving upwards and then downwards in the clear water with lazy sweep of tail and fin. One variety of the leather jacket tribe was very plentiful, and their great size was excelled only by their remarkable ugliness. Their ground color was a somber black, traversed by 3 broad bands of dull yellow. Some of the largest of these fish weighed quite up to 20 pounds, and were valued by the natives for their delicacy of flavor. They would always take a hook, but the Strong's Icelanders seldom attempted to capture them in this manner, for their enormous, hard, sharp, and human-like teeth played havoc with an ordinary fish hook, which, if smaller than a salmon hook, they would snap in pieces, and as their mouths are very small, in fact the leather jacket's mouth is ridiculous when compared to its bulk, larger and stronger hooks could not be used. Another and smaller variety were of a brilliant light blue, with vivid scarlet-tipped fins and tail, a perfectly defined circle of the same color round the eyes, and protruding teeth of a dull red. These we especially detested for their villainous habit of calmly swimming up to a pendant line, and nipping it in twain, apparently out of sheer humor. Well have the Samoans named the leather jacket Isuamumoana the Sirat. In 1 or 2 of the deeper pools were red, bream-shaped fish that I had in vain tried to catch with a hook, using every possible kind of bait, but the natives assured me that I was only wasting my time, as they fed only upon a long thread-like worm, which lived in the coral, and that a spear or the ope was the only way of capturing them. So far I had never actually handled one, but on this occasion we secured some dozens. Here and there we caught sight of a young hawkbill turtle darting out of sight under the ledge of the overhanging walls of coral, putting to flight thousands of small fish of a score of shapes and colors. We waited until the tide had fallen still lower and until the whole surface of the great sweeping curve of reef stood out, bare and steaming, under the bright tropic sun. Westward lay the ocean, blue and smooth as a mill pond, with only a gentle, heaving swell laving the outer wall of the coral barrier. Here and there upon its surface communities of snowy white terns hovered and fluttered, feeding upon small fish, or examining floating weed for tiny red and black crabs no bigger than a pea. Eastward and across the now shallowed water of the lagoon was our village of Lisa Copyright, the russet-hued, saddle-backed houses of thatch peeping out from the cocoa palms and breadfruit trees, beyond, the broken, rugged outline of the towering mountain range. Garmented from base to summit with God's mantle of living green, overhead a sky wondrous, unspecked blue. We were all sitting on the rocks, on the margin of the best and largest pool, smoking and chatting, when at a sign from Cusis, who was the head man, or local chief, of the village, the women took their bundles of ope, and laying the plants upon smooth portions of the reef began to pound them with round, heavy stones, brought from the village for the purpose. As each bundle was crushed and the sticky white juice exuded, it was rolled into a ball, used like a sponge to wipe up and absorb all the liquid that had escaped, and then handed to the men and boys, who leapt into the pool, and dived to the bottom, thrusting the balls of ope underneath every lower ledge and crevice, and then rising quickly to the surface and clambering out again. In less than 5 minutes the once crystal water had changed to a pale milky white, thousands upon thousands of tiny fish, about half an inch in length, and of many hues, began to rise to the surface, then others of a larger size, which the women at once scooped up with small nets, then presently, with much splashing and floundering, 2 or 3 of the handsome red fish I have described, with a great leather jacket, came up, and, lying on their sides, flapped helplessly on the surface. Other kinds, of the mullet species, came with them, trying to swim upright, but always falling over on their sides, and yet endeavoring to lift their heads above the water, as if gasping for air. Then more big leather jackets, some of which shot up from below as if they had been fired from a 5-head creek, and fish drugging in the by Louis Beck 12 mortar, and, running head on to the rocky wall of the pool, allowed themselves to be lifted out without a struggle. It was most exciting and intensely interesting to witness. Presently up came a half-grown hawk-bill turtle, his poor head erect and swaying from side to side. A boy leapt in and, seizing it by its flippers, pushed it up to some women, who quickly carried the creature to a small pool nearby, where it was placed to recover from the effects of the ope and then be taken ashore to the village turtle dock to grow and fatten for killing. The turtle dock, I must explain, was a walled-in enclosure partly natural, partly artificial, situated in a shallow part of the lagoon, wherein the Lisa copyright people confined those turtle that they could not at once eat. Sometimes as many as 30 were thus imprisoned and fed daily. Out of this one pool, which I think was not more than 15 yards across, we obtained many hundredweights of fish and 3 turtle. All fish which were too small to be eaten were thrown into other pools to recover from the effects of the ope. The very smallest, however, did not recover, and were left to float on the surface and become the prey of large fish when the incoming tide again covered the reef. I must here relate an incident that now occurred, and which will serve to illustrate the resourcefulness and surgical knowledge of a race of people who, had they met them, Darwin, Huxley and Frank Buckland would have delighted in and made known to the world. I shall describe it as briefly and as clearly as possible. I had brought with me a knife, a heavy, broad-backed, keen-edged weapon, which the Chinese carpenter of our wrecked ship had fashioned out for me from a flat 12-inch file of Sheffield steel, and Cusis had, later on, made me a wooden sheath for it. In my excitement at seeing a large fish rise to the surface, I used it as a spear, and then, the fish secured, had thrown the knife carelessly down. It fell edge upwards in a cleft of the coral rock, and Kinia copyright, the pretty 12-year-old daughter of Cusis, treading upon it, cut her left foot to the bone. Her father and myself sprang to her aid, and whilst I was tying the one handkerchief I possessed tightly round her leg below the knees so as to stay the terrible flow of blood, he rapidly skinned a large leather jacket. By the simple process of cutting through the skin around the head and shoulders and then dragging it off the body by holding the upper edge between his teeth and then with both hands pulling it downwards to the tail. In less than 5 minutes the sheet of tough fish skin was deftly and tightly wrapped round the child's foot, the handkerchief taken off and replaced by a coir fibre fishing line, wound round and round below and above the knee. The agony this caused the poor child made her faint, but her father knew what he was about when he ordered 2 of the women to carry her ashore, take off the covering of fish skin, cover the foot with wood ashes, and bind it up again. This was done, and when we returned to the village an hour or 2 later I found the girl seated in her father's house with her injured foot bandaged in a way that would have reflected credit on a MRCS. After exploiting the large pool, we turned our attention to some of those which were wider, but comparatively shallow, and in these, the bottoms of which were sandy, we obtained some hundreds of mullet and garfish, which were quickly overpowered by the oaf juice. In all I think that we carried back to the village quite 500 weight of fish, some of which were very large, the weight of 3 of the large banded leather jackets I estimated at 50 pounds. In after years, in other islands of the Pacific, when I saw the fearful and needless havoc created by traders and natives using vile dynamite cartridges and so destroying thousands of young fish by one explosion, I tried hard to get them to use either the futu nut or the oak plant, both of which under many names are known to the various peoples of eastern Polynesia. But the use of dynamite has an attractive element of danger. It is more sudden and destructive in its effect, it makes a noise and churns up and agitates the water, its violent concussion breaks and smashes the submarine coral forest into which it is thrown, and its terrific shock kills and mutilates hundreds of fish, which, through their bladders bursting, sink and are not recovered. 5 Head Creek, and fish drugging in the by Louis Beck 13. Only a few years ago an old and valued American friend of mine, an ex-ship captain settled in the Gilbert Islands in the North Pacific, became annoyed at what he deemed to be the excessive prices the natives charged for fish. The excessive price, I may mention, meant that he was asked $50 for a basket of fish weighing, say, 50 or 60 pounds. $50 is equal to an English florin, but no coin was handed. Over 4 sticks OT tobacco costing the trader about 10 cents, was the equivalent. So my friend decided to show the natives that he could do without them as far as his fish supply went. He bought a box of dynamite with fuse and caps, from a German trading schooner, and at once set to work, blowing off his right hand. Within 24 hours, through using too short a fuse, that wretched box of dynamite proved a curse to the island. The natives, despite my friend's accident, bought every cartridge from him, singly or in lots, and they then began to enjoy themselves every hour of the day for many weeks afterwards. The sullen thud of the explosive could be heard from all parts of the lagoon, followed by applauding shouts. Vast numbers of fish were blown to pieces, for no native would ever think of dividing a cartridge into half a dozen portions and using only one at a time. The entire 6-ounce cartridge was used, and sometimes so short were the fuses, that explosions would take place on the surface, to the delight of the children, who said, it was as good to hear as the cannons of a man of war. In the short space of 8 weeks, there were 5 serious accidents, 2 of which ended fatally. I was thankful when the last charge had been exploded, and although the natives begged me to import a fresh supply, I always declined, not on their account only, but because of the wanton destruction of fish involved. One day I decided to try and ascertain if ope would affect fish by being swallowed. I prepared 20 or 30 small balls of the plant, wrapped each one up carefully in thin strips of fish flesh, so as to thoroughly conceal the contents, and took them out to the turtle dock. The dock, although it was a safe enclosure for turtle, yet had many small passages through the coral rock which permitted the ingress and exit of moderately sized fish, particularly a variety of black and red spotted rock cod. Throwing in the balls, one by one, I watched. 3 of them were at once swallowed by a lively young hawkbill turtle, and the remainder were soon seized by some yellow eels and rock cod, before the larger and slower moving turtle, of which there were about 20 in the dock, discerned them. I waited about on the reef in the vicinity for quite 3 hours or more, returning to the pool at intervals and examining the condition of its occupants. But, at the end of that time, the ope had apparently taken no effect, and, as night was near, I returned to the village. On the following morning, I again went to the dock, lowered my line, and caught 6 rock cod. In the stomachs of 2 I found the undigested fibers of the ope which, through expansion, they had been unable to dislodge, but that it had not had any effect on them I was sure, for these 2 fish were as strong and vigorous when hooked as were the 4 others in whose stomachs there was no sign of ope. The young hawkbill turtle, however, was floating on the surface, and seemed very sick. Here is a point for ichthyologists. Are the digestive arrangements of a turtle more delicate than those of a fish? End of the Project Gutenberg ebook of Five Head Creek, and Fish Drugging in the Pacific, by Louis Beck. End of this Project Gutenberg ebook Five Head Creek. This file should be named 24642-8.txt or 24642-8.zip. This and all associated files of various formats will be found in http://www.gutenberg.org/2/4/6/4/24642. Produced by David Widger. Five Head Creek, and Fish Drugging in the by Louis Beck 14. Updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from public domain print editions means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission, and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the general terms of use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg TM electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg TM concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for the ebooks, unless you receive specific permission. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the rules is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose, such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances, and research. They may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything with public domain ebooks. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start, full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work. To protect the Project Gutenberg TM mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works, by using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg TM license, available with this file or online at http://gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg TM Electronic Works. 1.a. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg TM electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg TM electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg TM electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way within electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg TM electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg TM Electronic Works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg TM Electronic Works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the foundation or PGLOF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg TM Electronic Works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is in the public domain in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying, or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg TM mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg TM works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg TM name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg TM license when you share it without charge with others. 5 Head Creek, and Fish Drugging in the by Louis Beck 15. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing, or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg TM work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country outside the United States. 1.e Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg. 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg TM license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg TM work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. 1.e.2. If an individual Project Gutenberg TM electronic work is derived from the public domain, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the Project Gutenberg TM trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3. If an individual Project Gutenberg TM electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the Project Gutenberg TM license. For all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4. Do not unlink or detach or remove the full Project Gutenberg TM license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with Project Gutenberg TM. 1.e.5. Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or Immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg TM license. 1.e.6. You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a Project Gutenberg TM work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official Project Gutenberg TM website, www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee, or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full Project Gutenberg TM license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7. Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying or distributing any project Gutenberg TM works unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8. You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing project Gutenberg TM electronic works provided that you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of Project Gutenberg TM works. 5 Head Creek, and Fish Drugging in the by Louis Beck 16. Calculated using the method you already used to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the Project Gutenberg TM trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4, Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg TM license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg TM works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg TM works. 1.e.9. If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg TM electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing from both the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation and Michael Hart, the owner of the Project Gutenberg TM trademark. Contact the Foundation as set forth in Section 3 below. 1.f. 1.f.1. Project Gutenberg volunteers and employees expend considerable effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread public domain works in creating the Project Gutenberg TM collection. Despite these efforts, Project Gutenberg TM electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects, such as, but not limited to, incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other medium, a computer virus, or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. 1.f.2. Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages, except for the right of replacement or refund described in paragraph 1.f.3, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the owner of the Project Gutenberg TM trademark, and any other party distributing a Project Gutenberg TM electronic work, Under this agreement, disclaim all liability to you for damages, costs, and expenses, including legal fees. You agree that you have no remedies for negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty or breach of contract except those provided in paragraph F3. You agree that the foundation, the trademark owner, and any distributor under this agreement will not be liable to you for actual, direct, indirect, consequential, punitive, or incidental damages even if you give notice of the possibility of such damage. 1.F.3 Limited right of replacement or refund. If you discover a defect in this electronic work within 90 days of receiving it, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending a written explanation to the person you received the work from. If you received the work on a physical medium, you must return the medium with your written explanation. The person or entity that provided you with the defective work may elect to provide a replacement copy in lieu of a refund. If you received the work electronically, the person or entity providing it to you may choose to give you a second opportunity to receive the work electronically in lieu of a refund. If the second copy is also defective, you may demand a refund in writing without further opportunities to fix the problem. 5 Head Creek and Fish Drugging in the by Louis Beck 17. 1.F.4 Except for the limited right of replacement or refund set forth in paragraph 1.F.3, this work is provided to you as is with no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for any purpose. 1.F.5 Some states do not allow disclaimers of certain implied warranties or the exclusion or limitation of certain types of damages. If any disclaimer or limitation set forth in this agreement violates the law of the state applicable to this agreement, the agreement shall be interpreted to make the maximum disclaimer or limitation permitted by the applicable state law. The invalidity or unenforceability of any provision of this agreement shall not void the remaining provisions. 1.F.6 Indemnity. You agree to indemnify and hold the foundation, the trademark owner, any agent or employee of the foundation, anyone providing copies of Project Gutenberg TM electronic works in accordance with this agreement, and any volunteers associated with the production, promotion, and distribution of Project Gutenberg TM electronic works, harmless from all liability, costs, and expenses, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following which you do or cause to occur: a. Distribution of this or any Project Gutenberg TM work, b. Alteration, modification, or additions or deletions to any Project Gutenberg TM work, and c. Any defect you cause. Section 2. Information about the mission of Project Gutenberg TM. Project Gutenberg TM is synonymous with the free distribution of electronic works in formats readable by the widest variety of computers including obsolete, old, middle-aged, and new computers. It exists because of the efforts of hundreds of volunteers and donations from people in all walks of life. Volunteers and financial support to provide volunteers with the assistance they need is critical to reaching Project Gutenberg TM's goals and ensuring that the Project Gutenberg TM collection will remain freely available for generations to come. In 2001, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation was created to provide a secure and permanent future for Project Gutenberg TM and future generations. To learn more about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation and how your efforts and donations can help, see sections 3 and 4 in the Foundation webpage at http://www.pglaugh.org. Section 3. Information about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation is a non-profit 501(c)(3) educational corporation Organized under the laws of the state of Mississippi and granted tax-exempt status by the Internal Revenue Service. The Foundation's IN or Federal Tax Identification Number is 6426221541. Its 501(c)(3) letter is posted at http://pglaf.org/fundraising. Contributions to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation are tax-deductible to the full extent permitted by U.S. federal laws and your state's laws. The Foundation's principal office is located at 4557 Mellon Drive, South Fairbanks, Alaska 99712, but its volunteers and employees are scattered throughout numerous locations. Its business office is located at 809 North 1500 West, Salt Lake City, Utah 84116801596-1887, email business@pglaf.org. Email contact links and up to date contact information can be found at the Foundation's website and official page at http://pglaf.org. For additional contact information, Dr. Gregory B. Newby, Chief Executive and Director, GB Newby at pglaf.org. Section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Project Gutenberg TM depends upon and cannot survive without widespread public support and donations to carry out its mission of increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely Five-Head Creek, and Fish Drugging in the by Louis Beck 18. Distributed in machine-readable form accessible by the widest array of equipment including outdated equipment. Many small donations, $1 to $5,000, are particularly important to maintaining tax-exempt status with the IRS. The Foundation is committed to complying with the laws regulating charities and charitable donations in all 50 states of the United States. Compliance requirements are not uniform and it takes a considerable effort, much paperwork and many fees to meet and keep up with these requirements. We do not solicit donations in locations where we have not received written confirmation of compliance. To send donations or determine the status of compliance for any particular state, visit http://pglaf.org. While we cannot and do not solicit contributions from states where we have not met the solicitation requirements, we know of no prohibition against accepting unsolicited donations from donors in such states who approach us with offers to donate. International donations are gratefully accepted, but we cannot make any statements concerning tax treatment of donations received from outside the United States. U.S. laws alone swamp our small staff. Please check the Project Gutenberg web pages for current donation methods and addresses. Donations are accepted in a number of other ways including checks, online payments, and credit card donations. To donate, please visit http://pglaf.org/donate. Section 5. General information about Project Gutenberg TM Electronic Works. Professor Michael S. Hart is the originator of the Project Gutenberg TM concept of a library of electronic works that could be freely shared with anyone. For 30 years, he produced and distributed Project Gutenberg TM ebooks with only a loose network of volunteer support. Project Gutenberg TM ebooks are often created from several printed editions, all of which are confirmed as public domain in the U.S. unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we do not necessarily keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. Most people start at our website, which has the main PG search facility. http://www.gutenberg.org. This website includes information about Project Gutenberg TM, including how to make donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter to hear about new ebooks. Five-Head Creek, and Fish Drugging in the by Louis Beck. A free ebook from http://manybooks.net.